Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to Garage 23. On this, our probably most anticipated episode, we are finally going to begin reassembling our CD009 transmission for our Datsun drift car build. We've been waiting on some parts for quite a bit, but I think we finally have everything we need, so let's begin. All right, so where we left off with this project is we've been rebuilding this CD009 transmission that we got off of OfferUp, and we've been replacing the synchros and broken third gear. If you guys haven't seen those videos, check them out. They'll be linked up above. But we weren't able to finish what we were doing there because we had a little change of plans with the HR motor that we ended up picking up. The bell housings, I'd always wondered like how dissimilar they were between the DE and the HR. And it looks like they're close enough that you can make it work if you really had to, but it looks like that would require cutting part of the oil pan off and probably part of the crank girdle on the HR. And that's a little drastic, so I didn't really want to commit to that quite yet. So the only other option to get that to work would be to get a bell housing from a JK40 transmission. So like 370Z, G37, some G35, and try to bolt that onto our CD009 transmission. And I wasn't sure if that was even possible, but I came across this dude's YouTube channel named Cam Wilson. And he did kind of what we're trying to do, but the other way around. So he would take brand new transmissions from Nissan and he would take them apart and make the CD009 bell housing fit onto the newer transmissions. So his customer would essentially have a brand new transmission for their probably built or turbo DE engine. And like I said, we're trying to do the opposite because we need our CD009 transmission to mate up to our HR engine. And I actually got a hold of him, and in talking with him, it seems like it's pretty doable. And luckily he happened to have a JK40 bell housing laying around that he was willing to sell us, which was a huge help. So let's check out and see what we need to do to make it work. Here are both bell housings, the DE being on the right and the HR being on the left. And as you can see, they're pretty similar. In particular, those top four bolts, they're exactly the same, and they do line up, which I think I showed in the last video. And even this bolt hole down here does still line up, but everything else is different. Most importantly, the center section where the HR has that crank girdle, it has two bolts holding it on each side. So there's two bolts, and then the dowel is moved slightly higher up. Whereas on the DE, you only have one bolt and then the dowel above that. And also the relief for the starter is much smaller on the DE, and it actually has two, I guess for right-hand drive and left-hand drive applications. Not really sure. But the HR only has one larger relief for the starter, which also has locating dowels on it. So it's significantly different, and that wouldn't have really worked. I think the only way to get it to work with our block would have been to cut part of the section on the HR lower oil pan that kind of blocks this area of the starter from bolting up. But we also already had a nice lower mileage starter that came with our HR. So I didn't really want to go and buy a new one. So that was another aspect that kind of led to me making this decision. And then I got the main cover plates here for the input shaft. As you can see, this one's actually the DE. This one has a sleeve for the throwout bearing. And this one is the one for the JK transmission, which has the concentric slave cylinder on the inside. So you can see their bolt pattern on these is identical. They're interchangeable. The thing that isn't interchangeable is, I don't know if you'll really be able to tell, but the bearing on the input shaft on the DE is 100 millimeters in diameter, whereas the main bearing on the JK is 90 mil in diameter. So that's a pretty big issue. Also, they're different thicknesses. So the JK main bearing or input shaft bearing is 23 millimeters wide, whereas the DE is 25 millimeters wide. And my buddy Cam has made this work the other way around by taking the input shaft on the JK transmission and milling 2 millimeters off of it. So that would let the 25 mil bearing seat completely and locate properly in the bell housing. But since we're doing the opposite, we're gonna need to take our DE input shaft and make a 2mm spacer for the 90mm bearing to locate properly in this bell housing.
Ooh, that's hot.
Here's our input shaft from our DE, and here's the new bearing that we got. Pro tip on the bearings, Nissan wants like $100 something for this, and it's just a bearing from NTN, which I found on their website just by looking up the dimensions of it. So 90mm by 40mm by 23mm, and this was $15, $15 to $20 or something like that. So yeah, if you ever need bearings, don't go through the dealer, because they just buy this from NTN for, you know, 20 bucks or whatever, then put it in their box and then charge you an extra $100.
Where did you get all that money?
And the OEM bearing on this one was NSK, whereas this one's NTN. NTN's arguably better, but they're basically the same. What isn't the same though is the dimensions. So as I was saying before, this one is 23mm wide, whereas the DE main bearing is 25mm wide. And thanks to some very helpful friends of ours, we now have a 2mm input shaft spacer, which should make up that difference. So big thanks to our buddy Dan for helping us out with this. And as you can see, it is just precision machined. So yeah, it's just awesome. So yeah, let's get started trying to swap these bearings out. All right, we're at our press now. And these plates that came with our Harbor Freight 20-ton press are actually the perfect size to get this main bearing or input shaft bearing off, because it just slots in there just perfectly. Let's see. Now, before we start pressing on anything, there's a clip holding the bearing to the input shaft here, so we got to take that off. Just get some snap ring pliers. That'll work. All right, so now we should be ready to press this out. Don't lose that. Ooh. Scary. So there we have our stock bearing out of the way. Now our spacer is going to go in between there and our new bearing. So this one's going to sit in here like this. And then our new bearing is going to go on there. And if this works out right, our new bearing will land perfectly where that snap ring goes back. So fingers crossed. All right, now I think this will be easier if we use the smaller cutout on these plates. And this one I'm going to try to do upside down and press the shaft into the bearing. You just have to make sure that the snap ring is on the, clutch side of the input shaft. So like this. Because if you put it on backwards, you just made a whole lot more work for yourself. Yeah, this will go down there like that. And then we're gonna press the input shaft into the bearing. And I found this 22 millimeter socket that just happens to fit like perfectly into this recess inside of the input shaft right there. So like that, like even stays in place. So hopefully this works. Okay, I think that was it. And yeah, as you can see, we're right on that lip for the C-clip. So I think we're good. Let's try and get the C-clip back on. Yeah. There we go. Now we can come back over here and put our input shaft back on our main shaft, and that is good to go. So another option you would have here is you could get the input shaft from Nissan for a 370Z, and that would eliminate the need for you to make that little spacer that we did, because that's the main difference in the input shafts, is that the 370Z input shaft is made for this bearing, which is 23 millimeters wide, whereas the DE input shaft that we have here is made for the 25 mil bearing, which is why we needed that spacer. But the other difference is that the SYNCHRO for 5th is also different, and it might be in your best interest to switch to the 370Z input shaft, because that bearing is still available here pretty easily, whereas this SYNCHRO for 5th for a CD009 is technically discontinued in the US, but I got it from Japan, which still seems to be available. So we had already bought the SYNCHRO, so that's why we kind of had to go this route. But if you need to do it all together, I would probably recommend just switching to the 370Z input shaft. That way, if you don't have access to a lathe or a friend that has a lathe, then that would eliminate the need for you to machine that piece. All right, and just to show you guys the difference here, this is the CD009 Bellhousing, and our input shaft would go here. Yeah, so that 10 mils, a pretty big difference. You come over to our JK40 Bellhousing. It's just perfect. All right, now we're ready to put everything back together. And for me, this has been weeks, maybe months between our second video of this and now. But good thing we have a couple other videos here you can check out to see how it came apart. So let's get started. All right, so now we have our mid plate held in the vise with some wood blocks. It's a little better than the cardboard that we had in there before. Or is it? Isn't cardboard made of paper, which is made of wood? Never really thought of cardboard as being wood. Anyway, that should be in there more securely. And now we need to put our counter shaft and main shaft in there together, which is kind of a pain in the ass because they're both pretty heavy. And not to mention the input shaft needs to not fall off the main shaft. So what I'm thinking is to try and do one at a time. Not really sure if that's gonna work, but we're gonna give it a shot. So I'm thinking if we take this counter shaft bearing out of here, just, you know, it's not held in by anything right now. Let's just push it out. If we push that out, we should have enough room to put the main shaft in and then the counter shaft afterwards. So let's see if that works. We're gonna take the input shaft off for now so we don't accidentally drop it. Now we have our main shaft. This by itself is pretty damn heavy. And then these larger bushings are pretty precision made, so it needs to slide in there perfectly or else it's just gonna keep getting jammed up. Like this. You just gotta keep like wiggling it around for it to like center. There we go. That was a little too far. All right, that's about right. That's where the groove for the snap ring, it's flush on the back side of here. Also make sure you have your mid plate in correctly. The part with the bearing retainer, the bolt-in bearing retainer thing, should go toward the back, and the gear sacks come in from the front here. Now, let's see if we can get the countershaft in under it. Hopefully getting that bearing out of there gave us enough room. Make sure these little SYNCHRO things aren't gonna fall out. Okay, that's another pain if those little things come out of there, but got that back in place. Now we can put the main input shaft on there. Also took the countershaft out of the way just so I wouldn't drop it while I was fixing this. And then this one has recesses in the hub where the SYNCHRO needs to slide into. So make sure those are on there correctly. Now we can put the countershaft back on. There we go. Now I need to slide the main shaft back where it was. Now as you can see, the input shaft is kind of locked in place, or it's not gonna fall out at least. All right, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put the snap ring and the retainer on the back of this now, just to keep any of this from moving and potentially falling out. So this is the snap ring that goes around here. Let's see if we can just get it in there by hand. And it looks like the countershaft bearing's in the way. Okay, so what you need to do here is get the edge of the snap ring into the wider gap so it's not interfering with the lower bearing from the countershaft. And then it should snap right in place. All right, now we can put our bearing retainer on. And all these were T40 Torx bits. All right, that should be good to go. Okay, now we're ready to start putting our shift forks back on. And we're gonna start with third, which is the one that looks like this. And then it has the rod here. This one's pretty simple. It just has the one hole for the roll pins. And as you can see, it's offset from center. And this is basically how it goes in there like that. So you want the offset to be toward the back. And then the shift fork goes in there with this relief facing up. So just like that on your 3/4. And then the rod through it. And then there's a hole in the mid plate where the rod will go into. Now you're ready for your roll pins. And you can start with the bigger one. Yeah, start with the bigger one. And you just want to line up the hole in the shift fork with the hole in the rod. And you want to make sure it's as centered as you can get it. There we go. Now follow that up with the smaller one. And that's your 3/4. All right, up next is our 5/6 shift fork. This is the one with the notch at the end of the rod. And that's gonna go in here like that. And then it's gonna go into the mid plate right there. So you wanna line up the opening in the shift fork with the opening in the shift rod. Then you can put your roll pins in. Okay, so now before we put our 1/2 shift fork back in, we need to start putting all this junk back. And the first thing we gotta do is put this long boy back in place. And that one just goes right in the middle there. Right there. So if you guys don't remember from the last video, you have that long one right there, and then you have the shift forks that go here. And Then you have 2 check balls that go here on each side, and then another shift fork on each side here, or shift rod. And then on this side you have 1 more check ball, the spring, and then the plug. And same deal for the top ones, check balls, springs, and plugs. So with that middle one in place, then we can put the 1 and 2 shift rod back. And this is one of the ones that has the little retainer, or a little tic-tac looking thing in the middle. That's what's gonna go inside of here and kind of prevent you from shifting into 2 different gears at the same time. Okay. All right, so that's our 1-2 shift fork back in place. Now we got to work on the rest of this over here. Okay, so now before we can continue, we're at the part that I was a little unsure about, because we need to press the counter shaft reverse gear on, as well as the main shaft reverse gear on. Or maybe not the gear just slides on with the needle bearing, but the hub needs to be pressed on. So these 2 things need to be pressed on, the counter shaft and main shaft. And to do that, this whole thing has to go in the press like this. And the manual says you need some kind of special tool to hold the main shaft while you press this on. Doesn't seem like that's really necessary, but I guess we'll have to try it and see. Also, the counter shaft reverse gear has a little washer on it, and it's got these like grooves, and those go toward the mid plate, and that's what touches the roller bearing in there. And then this shaft side of the gear goes toward the mid plate also and gets pressed on like that. So I guess we'll have to see how this is gonna work. All right, so we got the whole assembly here in the press. I tapped the counter shaft reverse gear on there a little bit with the hammer, and just so it'll stay in place a bit. And we're gonna, I guess, use a stack of sockets and see how this goes. All right, that looks like it went pretty well. Let's try and put the snap ring on there. Let's see if we need to press it in a little bit more or what. Yeah, all right, so that looks perfect. And the other one's the one that's gonna be an issue. Okay, so I think we're gonna have to get creative and figure something else out, because this method just isn't gonna work for us, primarily because the space between the press here isn't wide enough to let the gear stack pass down to sit where it needs to be. And we can't press from the end of the main shaft, because that's the input shaft. And if we were to do that, we would crush the SYNCHRO ring that we just bought. We would probably crush that onto the input shaft, as well as crush the needle bearings that are inside of that. So that's not an option. The only thing I can think of doing is trying to heat up the SYNCHRO hub and trying to whack it on with the hammer. That's not ideal, but I can't really think of any other way to do this. So let's see if that works out for us. Well, that could have gone better, but it looks like it worked out. The C-clip itself looks like it's a little scratched up, because the hub wouldn't seat entirely all the way where it's supposed to, but it felt like it was bottoming out. So I don't know I don't know why I was doing that, but we pushed it in just by tapping on it with the screwdriver and it seems fine. So now we need to continue putting our shift forks and rods back in. So we need to take the selector off of the hub and then put it on the fork here and then slide this into place. But before that, this is one of those rods that has the little tic tac thing in the way. So I need to make sure to put that back. This one fell out while it was on the table. It goes in there like that. Just make sure it doesn't fall out of there. Then you need to line up the selector with the little pads on the SYNCHRO hub. I should probably show you guys. The selector has these little spots where there's like teeth missing. That tooth in the middle between the two spaces, that's what goes over the little pads on the synchronizer hub. So you need to line up all three of those with their respective pads. And then you can push on the pads to let the selector seat in all the way. Ow. Yeah, try not to smash your finger. All right, that one looks good. Now, on to the next one. All right, next up, I think we can start putting the levers back on for 5th and 6th. Then I believe this one can go in next. Maybe this one was first. Yeah, I think this one went before the reverse one. Oh, and also the check balls need to go in there. So 2 check balls go in there. All right, that's that. Now to the next side. So 2 more check balls in between here. And also the lever thing for 3rd and 4th goes on now. And the bottom part of this one is separate, so careful with that. So we're going to leave that one in there so the check balls don't fall out. And I'm going to tighten this. And we need a different socket. All right, this should be good. Now for the last piece here. Oh, and this one, it should have the 3 notches to the outer side and then the single notch to the inside over here, in case you lost track of how it went. And the second one. There we are. Now another check ball here, and then spring and the plug. So check ball. spring, and plug. Okay. Now on the top here, same thing, check ball, spring, plug. They're all the same on that side, so, and that's the last of our check balls, so that's nice. 1, 2, 3. And the springs, 1, 2, 3. And the plugs. Now the last thing to go in is our actual shift rod. Like that. Then the last roll pin that goes here. All right. And that's basically it. That's our assembled gear stacks into our mid plate. Last thing to do is put the case on. All right, home stretch. The only things left to do are get the windage tray back on and basically put everything in the case. And to do that, we're gonna need to take it off the vise now. Hopefully we don't drop this. All right, that should work. So I cleaned up the windage tray a bit, and there's also a magnet. This is a magnet I was looking for the first time when I took it apart. I thought there were supposed to be magnets in here, but on this case, there's a little slot down at the bottom here where the magnet sits. It would help if it would stay in there, but. And the windage tray has one long bolt, one short bolt, and a nut. The nut goes at the front. The long bolt goes through the back of the mid plate here. Then the short one goes on the front. All right, so 10 mil bolt right there. And the other one is over here. Now we're ready to start putting it in the case. All right, so now we need to clean our mating surfaces, both on the mid plate and the back half of the case and the front half of the case. We're gonna start with this back half. And they already look pretty clean actually, but there's still like little junk on them. You can use a fresh razor blade for some of the bigger pieces. You wanna try not to scratch it up too much. And definitely don't use like rough sandpaper or anything like that. You mostly just don't want there to be gear oil on the surface, because that will not let it seal properly. If there's a little bit of old silicone on it, that'll still be fine. It'll still bond, the new silicone will still bond to the old stuff. So that's not a huge deal. But you just want to get any big chunks that are like already dried off, because that might keep it from sealing. But it should be fine for the most part. All right, now we're ready for silicone. I like using the Permatex gray. Pretty sure that's what Nissan uses from the factory, or at least it's gray colored. And I like the big tubes because then you're not like cramping up your fingers trying to get it all around the surface perfectly. Now we're gonna carefully slide this onto the mid plate. Another thing I forgot to mention was the reverse idler gear. It's got a washer on one side and it's just kind of sitting there loose. It just gets sandwiched between the rear housing and the mid plate. but you can't really put it on backwards. It's got the roll pin sticking out on one side, and the mid plate has a recess for the roll pin. So you just put it in there like that, and then make sure your washer's on there. The washer has a flat spot on one side, so you can't really put that on wrong either. Just gotta make sure it doesn't fall out or anything. Now slide this on without smearing the silicone on anything. And you just want it to sit on the dowels, just so it's lined up right. I'm not necessarily trying to seal it all together right now. I just need this back half on here so we have somewhere to rest it on. So now we need to try and stand it up. I think that's gonna be the best way to try and get the bell housing on. All right, that went pretty well. It's pretty stable too. Still, I wouldn't just like leave this here, but it's easier this way because this stupid magnet doesn't have anywhere, doesn't really like get locked in there, just kind of sits in there. So we're gonna put it in there now, because the first thing I was gonna try to do is have the bell housing on the floor and then drop the gear set into it. But then that magnet wouldn't stay in place and it would just fall out, and I figured it'd be a pain in the ass to try and keep it in place while I'm trying to do all that, and I'd probably smear the silicone all over the place. So I think this is gonna be the better way to do it. Our silicone looks pretty good. You don't wanna tighten anything yet anyway. You want the silicone to just squeeze out of the seams, and then you're gonna let it dry like that for, I think like an hour or so. So then we gotta clean up this side of the mid plate. You want to pay particular attention to the bottom. Make sure there's no oil or anything in the way, because that's where the oil mostly sits. So you don't want it to leak from there. Okay. All right, now let's see if this bell housing is going to fit after all. The bell housing has this little like oil baffle thing on the top. Seems pretty secure. I don't think it's going to fall out, so I think we should be all right. Oh, this is going to be tricky. So that 10 mil stud on the windage tray needs to line up with this hole on the bell housing. And it's a little bent because it dropped the gear set on the table. Let's straighten it out a bit. All right. That went pretty well. I'm gonna put a couple of bolts in it, not like tighten them down, but just to hold it together. And then we're gonna let this sit for about an hour. Come back and finish everything up after the silicone is set. All right, now we can lay down in a less precarious position. All right, it looks like a transmission again. So let this marinate for about an hour, maybe a little more. Just go do stuff, come back later. All right, that should be just about enough time. Now we can go ahead and put all the rest of the bolts for the bell housing back in and tighten them down. Remember, there's one inside the case here. Actually, I could probably stand it up now. All right, this is a moment of truth. Hopefully all the stuff in here lines up still. Snap ring needs to fit in here. All right, looks good. Yeah. And this bearing goes in here. Also still looks good. Then we had a 10 mil nut that holds that windage tray on the front end right here. Then I think we're ready for the cover. All right, now we can put the gasket back. Just kind of try and keep it in place there. And then our cover plate. And these bottom 4 bolts are the ones that had this sealer on them. So make sure you put those back in the lower 4 spots. And that's that. Okay, first thing that we can put back on here is this locator dealie. It goes in here. And it's got these like shoulder bolts that are a little different from the other 10 mils in there. So these are the ones that hold that one in place. And then we can put the springs and stuff to hold the shifter centered on the sides here and on the back over here. These were 2 different lengths, and one of them's kind of a different shape. So this blue spring that's a little shorter than the other one, and then this dowel with the dip in the middle, I guess. This is the one that goes on this side over here. Just want to take your time threading it in, because you are going to have to compress the spring while you're doing that, and that really raises the risk of you cross threading it. So just take your time. And then the other side looks like this. Doesn't have a dip in the middle on the dowel, and the spring's a bit longer. And that one goes over here. And then your last check ball is going to go in this hole here, along with your last spring. This spring's pretty long. That's because it has to reach all the way up to the top cover. Then in this spot here on the outside, you can't quite see it from there. On here is where this piece goes. And this is where our broken sensor went. So as you can see, that now fits in that little groove on the shifter. I think that's just about everything. We just need to put the top cover back on. Okay. So just line up your gasket and hold the spring down with the cover, and put these bolts on first so they kind of hold the spring in place. And now we are ready for shifter. And see if all our work paid off more or less.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
So the shifter also had a roll pin holding it on. I'm only gonna put one just because I'm probably not gonna use this shifter because it probably isn't gonna fit in the Datsun. I'm probably gonna end up taking it back off, but we need to put it on just to make sure it goes through all the gears and feels all right and everything. So. All right, that's it, back in one piece. Now the question is it gonna go through all the gears, and is it gonna spin like it's supposed to? And if you guys will recall, before, if we try to put it in any gear other than third, the input shaft and output shaft would be locked up. They wouldn't spin. Now, we can check. I'm gonna put this piece of drive shaft back here so we can kind of see if it's spinning. So first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And then of course, neutral. So it actually works like it should. Question is it actually gonna like work properly when it's in the car? Which for that, we're gonna have to wait quite a bit because we're gonna have to finish all the other aspects of the build before we can actually get it running. All right, that about wraps it up for the CD009 trilogy. Hope this helps you guys out and eliminates the need for you guys to keep looking for new transmissions every time you clutch kick one too many times. So the only issue I can see going forward is maybe parts availability, because I know for some of the stuff, there wasn't a whole lot of them on hand, and some stuff had to come from like Dubai and Japan, obviously. Some stuff you might be able to source locally, so hopefully the more people know that you can just kind of put these back together, they won't just like toss out old broken transmissions, because there's still a lot of decent parts in broken ones. You know, like this one, if we broke third, everything else is still good. So hopefully there's more situations like that. Another issue we had was the press. I know most of you guys aren't gonna have anything bigger than the Harbor Freight 20-ton press. I mean, that's probably gonna be what everybody is gonna buy. I mean, the only thing I can think of is to like, what we did with John's press is like modify the cross member part of it to be a little wider. I didn't have enough material to do that. I might wanna try and like borrow it from him and see if that'll fit on this. But that's really the only issue. That's why we had to resort to hammering on the reverse hub. I realize that kind of messes with the hardening of the metal, but it's the reverse gear. I mean, that, in my opinion, that really doesn't need a synchro in the first place, but you know, whatever. It really shouldn't see that much stress. See if it causes any issues down the line. I'm pretty sure it'll be fine. Other than that, everything looks to have gone pretty smoothly. Everything at least spins like it's supposed to now, unlike it did before where it was just pretty much locked up. Thanks for joining us, and peace out and keep moving forward.